Boys Are Back in Town, ultimate Lizzy song, do you think?
Nah, there's about 30 ultimate Lizzy songs. You should never be fooled by the obvious.
Phil Lynott was Thin Lizzy. The rest was window dressing. It was remarkably good window dressing, but Lynott defined and focused Lizzy.
My son was the greatest rock and roll star in all the world. That's me, I always do that.
He could make people feel good or make them feel terrible just by the way he would sort of sing a tune.
I've got to say that I think he was one of the greatest frontmen ever.
You know, I just didn't want to jump up on the stage and be angry. Right. For the sake of it. And so that's why I could never associate with the punk thing. Right. And the way I can't associate with this heavy metal revival. I have to be saying something.
Lizzy's most memorable tunes certainly would live with anyone's.
They gave Ireland their first, I think, superstar rock band. They were the real deal.
People tend to divide Thin Lizzy's career into two parts. There's the Eric Bell era and the rest. And the Eric Bell era was about 3 albums. Thin Lizzy, Shades of a Blue Orphanage, and Vagabonds of the Western World. Now, Thin Lizzy started very much as Eric Bell's band. He'd been in them before as a guitarist. He had the experience.
I was with a show band called The Dreams, and they were paying me good money, and I was working 6 nights a week with them. And then I started thinking, this music's a load of crap, you know. I was playing like Simple Simon Says, put your hand in the air, you know. And I was thinking, how long can I keep this up, you know? Like I want to start playing again, yeah. And I'd saved up a little bit of money, and it took me about 6 months to make up my mind eventually to leave the show band, and I did. And that's when I started going out to all the pubs and clubs on my own, asking all these musicians, did they know any bass players and drummers that would form a group with me?
It was a very kind of small, friendly scene around that time among musicians, and we used to hang out together a bit and eat in the same late night restaurants and meet up. And so Philip was, you know, a member of the beat group community as it was in those days, you know.
I was in a bar one night in Dublin. I met Eric Rickson. He was a keyboard player from Belfast, and he was in exactly the same position as me. And we ended up in this club called the Countdown Club. And the band that came on was Orphanage, and Phil Lynott was the singer, and Downey was the drummer. And I went, who is this drummer? He just, you know, wow, I gotta get him for my band. They took a break, and Philip and Bram went into the changing room, and I walked in and went, hello, I'm Eric Bell. I used to play with Dreams show band. And they're looking at me like, and I said, I was just wondering if you know any bass players and drummers, because I want to form a group. Philip came over to me and he said, we'll form a band with you. And Bran wasn't interested. Bran said, no, I think we should keep Orphanage. And Phil said, no, ma'am, we want to form a new group. You know, Orphanage has got boring. Why don't we form a band with Eric? And Bran said, yeah, okay.
Pretty unusual, you know. I can't think beyond Hendrix and Lizzy of any other white band with a black lead singer. Certainly not at that time.
Philip was one of 3 black people that you'd see in Dublin. Outside of Dublin, you wouldn't really see black people. So when we went to play in Carlow, Kilkenny, even Cork, Galway, anywhere, as soon as we got out of the van and went into a pub or a restaurant, people would go, "Oh, there's a black guy." And I know this sounds mad, and it's not that long ago, but that's the way it was, you know?
The first album, which they did with Scott English, was 1971. Allegedly, the band and producer were completely out of their heads the whole time. They weren't really present.
We were extremely stoned. There was so much smoke in the studio I couldn't see Philip or Brian at all. And a lot of it was ad-libbed right on the spot.
Decca was so dismayed when they heard the results that they sent one of their own rock producers, Nick Tauber, in to sort of remix and rejig the whole album without the consent of or knowledge of Thin Lizzy. So I think they were fairly dismayed when they found that out.
Although the mix might not have been great, the songs were fantastic, and Phil's voice and the whole vibe was brilliant, and I was really impressed with them. You know, they were just superb. So I mixed the album, and it turned out pretty well, and Philip was really pleased with it. He just said it was so much of an improvement, and I met him and he thanked me and everything, and I got on really well with him. I thought he was a really impressive man. He was charismatic, he was charming, that Irish charm, and he also was an incredibly talented young man. Really talented bass player and an unbelievable songwriter, lyrically and melodically.
He wrote a song called Dublin, another one called Dee Levine, and there's loads of them from that period, and they're beautifully written. They're as fine as anything. I mean, I'm a great fan of Paddy Kavanagh and Seamus Heaney and all the great Irish poets, and you could take out about 2 or 3 of his and you could say they're nearly there. If he crafted them a bit more, they would be there. They're that good. Do you know what I mean?
Philip used to describe it, he said it's a very warm album. It sounds very mellow, very warm type of feel off it, which I think is true. And I think there's some very clever stuff on it. I don't think I could ever play the guitar work that I played on the track Remembering. I don't think I could ever play it again, you know, because a lot of it was just made up on the spot.
The hallmarks were really of something in progress rather than the finished article. I don't think Brian Downey had really got his rocky drums going yet. Eric Bell obviously playing the lead guitar, he was there, but a 3-piece, fairly light, fairly folk rocky.
They were a mixed bag. They weren't sort of classic Lizzy. They weren't sort of so proficient musically.
They were finding their way in the studio. They'd played gigs, but obviously being within the 4 walls of a studio is a different thing. It was a reasonable effort, but obviously nowhere near what they were going to achieve later.
We finished the first album and then we were brought back to Ireland and we lived there as usual and did a few more gigs, and the album was released and a lot of our fans bought it, but it was pretty hard to get. And I remember Philip used to be going down to the record shops personally to see if it was in the shops, and it wasn't, and he would phone up Decca and really give them a bollocking and say, like, what's the friggin' point of having the album if it's not available, you know?
The only people who got any kind of recognition and went up that other step were people who'd actually left Ireland, like Rory Gallagher and Granny's Intentions, who were a band that were around the the early 70s. So until Lizzy went away, they couldn't really go up that extra rung in the ladder.
So our management said, I think we need to go somewhere else now, so we ended up living in England. But the funny thing about it was, no one knew who we were. So we were coming from Ireland, #1, and then we came to England, and it was like, thin, no one knew who we were. So we had to start all over again from the very bottom.
There was one concert he did. He came to Manchester, and Susie Quattro was on first. Thin Lizzy was on second, and the lead band, the Stars, was called Slade. I'm backstage with Philip, and all of a sudden I see Susie Quattro, and she run past Philip's dressing room. She's crying. They booed her off the stage by screaming, "I'm Slade." They wouldn't listen. So Philip looked at me and he went, "Oh, Jesus," So out he goes. And I go back to my seat, and he walks on stage, and he went, they started booing, "Get off, black arse, get back to Africa." So I jumped up and I ran over to the young fella that said that, and I started to throttle him. I said, "Listen, I had to be pulled off the young fella. This is the truth." And the next thing was Philip went, he got the mic and he went, "Give us a chance." And somehow or other, they listened, but not attentively as Philip would have liked.
We were on the road permanently to try and get the name Thin Lizzy into people's minds, yeah. And it was some nights we'd play for next to nothing, Like the money we would go out for would be very, very little money compared to what we used to go for in Ireland. But it was to build the name of the band up.
Philip was amazing because he went up and down that M1, and it's one of the things I always admired him for, that he could just keep doing it. The band were in debt, things were hard, and I was amazed that anybody could just do it. It was so hard because this wasn't in a coach or anything. This was in a transit van.
In those days, you knew it was going to take 2 or 3 albums to break a band. You knew that's how you did it. So what you did was you took the best material that they had, and what you did was you worked on it, and you moulded it, and you took the best of what you had there, and then you took it on the road. And like Thin Lizzy, who were unbelievable at that, Phil sucked in all the impressions, what were the best songs, what actually got people going, and he used all that knowledge he was gaining to make the next album, which was the first one I actually produced, which was Shades of Blue of Orphanage. That was the next one on the line.
I think obviously anybody's first album, they will tend to be finding their way in the studio. Blue Orphanage, I would say they knew where they were going.
I think the second album was an improvement, performance-wise and writing-wise, but it was an improvement recording-wise, but could have been a lot better. We were under the cosh for money. Record companies in those days were still tight about money, and because we hadn't broken commercially yet, even though they were doing really well live, we hadn't actually sold any records to a significant amount, so we were under the cosh.
I think Decca Records told them to kind of clean up their act somewhat, and they were sort of still young and impressionable enough. So they went along with Decca and probably didn't drink as much or do every drug known to man on the second album.
But neither album really hit because there was no continuity, no cohesion. They had folk elements, they had their Celtic roots, and they were trying to be a power trio in the Hendrix Experience style.
I always think back at it on that album, and I'm sure Phil and the boys do, Eric and Brian, is it could have been better, because it just didn't do justice to how far the band had come live-wise and as performers and as writers. It didn't do them justice. After the album was done, we went on tour. The band went on tour, worked really, really hard, and got a bit bigger and bigger following, and were making headway because they were fantastic. I mean, live, they were always as good as their records. They were brilliant live, and Phil was getting better and better as a showman. The audience was getting bigger and bigger, and they were selling out places. And but they still weren't at their peak. They were nowhere near it. They were just doing the smaller clubs. And then we went in to record a single.
We used to rehearse once a week in this pub in London. This particular day, we turned up as usual for a rehearsal, and we were trying different ideas, and there was nothing working. So Philip started going up to the microphone, playing rhythm and singing various songs like Seven Drunken Nights and Mary from Dunlow and all this type of Irish stuff. And at one point he got on to Whiskey in the Jar. So I started thinking, pick up the guitar, and I started playing along with him just as something to do, basically. The next minute the door opened and Ted Carroll walked in. He was one of our managers, Dublin man. And Ted goes, by the way, as he's setting up my amp, he's talking, what was that song you just stopped playing when I walked in the room? And Phil goes, what? Oh, I was only messing about. Ted, that was Whiskey in the Jar or something. He says, when's your next single to be with Decca? Oh, about 5 weeks. Have you got a song for it, for the single? And they said, oh yeah, Black Boys in the Corner. It's an original song. Have you got a B-side? No. Well, why don't you put Whiskey in the Jar on the B-side? I took all of this money, and it was pretty. I took all of this money, and I brought it home to Mary. But 5 weeks later, we went into the studio, and we recorded Black Boys in the Corner. And then the guy said, what are you going to put in the B-side? And we said, Whiskey in the Jar. And then we had a little sort of party at the Mix, and Gary Merrick and Dan, and a few of our mates and so on and so on. And with a few drinks, and we played the 2 tracks, Black Boys in the Corner and Whiskey in the Jar. And everyone says, A-side, Whiskey in the Jar. And myself, Philip and Bran still said, no man, we're serious musicians, you know. We want Black Boys in the Corner on the A-side. But we ended up, it was a double A-side.
Lynott definitely was looking to make a driving rock band, so he was disappointed, I know, at Whiskey in the Jar coming out. It wasn't one of his own compositions. He was blossoming as a writer. So I think that Lynott felt antagonistic towards the song, purely because he hadn't written it. He felt that it made the band, took the band down a road that was firmly, had one foot in folk music, which he didn't want to go.
It became a big hit. It was #1 in Ireland, reached #6 in the UK, and it was a traditional Irish song which Lizzy adapted. It had the Celtic roots and was so obviously Celtic, but it had a bit of a rocked up feel to it.
Philip kind of played rock music, but with Irish melodies running through it, and people who knew Irish music could kind of recognise these melodies, and not necessarily, they're not in your face or anything like that, but there is an Irishness about his music.
Philip was a black man in Dublin, you know, but he was very, very Dublin, very, very Irish, and he had those melodies seem to be in Philip, you know, because that melody goes through all of his work, which I think is inherent in Irish musicians, you know.
We had no real music identification. The Bachelors, I think, were our challenge to the Beatles, and they won because they grinned more. I think they had about 5 #1 hits in a row, but they weren't a rock band. Thin Lizzy came along and they were amazing, and they were rockers and they were cool, and they gave us all a sense of identity almost.
On the studio recording of Whiskey in the Jar, there is no bass. It's basically drums, acoustic guitar and electric guitar. Now, Phil obviously was singing. It wasn't his song, so I rather suspect he was doing it a little half-heartedly. But on the TV recordings that you see, you'll often see him playing an electric guitar. Now, that is because obviously there's no bass, but I think he probably found the idea of standing up there with an acoustic guitar perhaps not macho enough for him.
Interestingly enough, it became a millstone around Lizzy's neck because it was such a big hit single, and it didn't really define their sound. It defined, in a way, the midpoint between the Eric Bell era and what was to become the Phil Lynott era, the era we know and love today. But because it was midway, it represented neither particularly well. It had that Celtic flow from the early days and had the rock imagery and attitude that was to be taken slightly further.
Once they'd had the hit, it was Thin Lizzy, Whiskey in the Jar, and it wasn't particularly what a song that they identified with.
It was a massive hit, and it's still now, one of the classic songs that people play on the jukebox. I still hear it all over the place, and they use it for adverts and all sorts of things. And that was a massive hit. I mean, in those days, to get to number one, you had to sell a lot of records, and that record made number 3, but hung around in the charts for months and months and months. Therefore, money started coming back into the record company. Therefore, when we went to make the next record, they let the band take their time, and consequently they produced a great record. And that is really where they began to become Thin Lizzy for me.
And your name, man, if you're looking for trouble, hey, that's it, no, if no one's tougher than me. You back at your base, it's from the sea and Dublin. Hey, little girl, keep your hands out of me, 'cause I'm a rocker.
Vagabonds of the Western World, it was like for me anyway, it was a turning point musically in the studios. We were all starting to take it all a bit more serious, yeah.
With Vagabonds of the Western World, albeit an album a lot of people dismiss, that's when Thin Lizzy really got going.
You know, I kissed the raid out the blue. I said, hey baby, meet me, I'm a tough guy. I got a motorcycle outside, you wanna ride?
Vagabonds, to me, is the first great Thin Lizzy album. There are great songs on all the other bits, and all the other 2 albums and the EP and the single Whiskey. They're great songs, but this is a great record. It's a great record from the word go, with the rocker and the Vagabonds and all those. It's just a whole album. And they had spent their time doing it, and we didn't get pushed. Decca built a brand new studio, multi-track studio for rock bands, which was in Finsbury Park, and we were one of the first bands in there, and we got to stay there for as long as we wanted, and we made a great record. And they were, I think, for the first time, close to being pleased with the record. I know Phil was.
It was the first time Phil Lynott had been allowed to sort of write most of the album, and that's where you can sort of hear his early songwriting skills starting to really come to the fore. It's a fledgling Lynott songwriter, and you can hear that he's making mistakes. He's sort of overextending songs. Obviously, it's a rock band. There's going to be lots of guitar solos, but they sort of rely heavily on a rock guitar solo.
When I make records now, I don't put an album to bed till I'm really happy, and if there's something that's niggling me, I'll go back and do it. But before, we always made compromised, until this album, everyone compromised over studio time or this or that. But this time, no one compromised, and it really worked. And I think Phil, for the first time, felt comfortable with what he'd done, and he should be, because it was a great piece of music. I'm proud of everything I did with the boys, or everything. But obviously, the proudest for me is Vagabonds, because we actually progressed, and actually, the final album I did was the big one for me and for them at that point, and I think it was a great piece of work.
Myself and Philip knew each other to see. He was into Marvel Comics, I remember well, because I did the cover for Poetry magazine at the time, and I used the Silver Surfer icon, stuff like that. So he said he wanted to work with me, and the first thing we did was Vagabonds of the Western World, very successful album for Thin Lizzy. It sort of put them on the map.
Like around this time, I started going a bit a bit weird because of various things in my private life, and you know, any money I got, I would spend it on alcohol or cheap sherry, and I was smoking like dope like all day, and I started getting really sort of freaked out by everything.
Eric was very into himself and his music, which is entitled to be, same as I am into myself and my art. And he parted company with Lizzy, which I thought was a terrible shame.
One of these tracks, The Hero and the Madman, I remember that day we were recording that track. And I went out to do the solo of The Hero and the Madman, and I basically cracked up. I heard the lyrics, "Oh, are you the hero? Oh, are you the madman?" And I started, fuck me, this track's about me. Yeah. And I just something went click, something fused, you know, with the help of the Valium and the other stuff. And I said, wow, I gotta get out of here. And I just wanted out. I had enough, you know. That was me. Gone.
Eric Bell is one of the best players I've ever heard in my life. He's the most mental idiot. When he starts playing the guitar, he goes off in his shit. I don't know what he's talking about when he goes, yeah.
Eric Bell, I loved as a guitarist. I thought he had a totally unique sound that Edge in U2 has taken a stage further. This sort of ringing guitar, you know, it's beautiful. Like Chuck Berry had it too, you know, and it's a beautiful way of playing it. I can't think of anybody doing it right now. It's beautiful play, and I loved what he added to the group.
I think that Eric is a fantastic blues guitarist. Very Hendrixy orientated, but more blues. So he's like somewhere between Hendrix and Roy Gallagher, really. Very good guitarist, very technically brilliant, very soulful, and very committed.
Technically, he's not the most proficient guitar player in the world, but he had a sort of very fluid, very flowing, very sort of quite a creamy guitar sound, which was not dissimilar to Paul Kossoff of Free. He was more lyrical as a guitar player, and the style at the time was, you know, it was the sort of Page, Beck, Iommi, Blackmore, kind of very heavy, sort of hard rocking guitar styles. So it was actually a breath of fresh air to hear him playing something that wasn't actually out and out rock music. It was more kind of, you know, Gaelic music within the context of a rock band, and that's what made it interesting. That's what showed off Phil Lynott's voice as well.
But as time started to develop, up around the time of Vagabonds of the Western World, that's when Phil Lynott emerged as the leader. He was the one with the stroke of genius, the touch that was going to take Thin Lizzy further if anybody could.
I think Phil was on this treadmill of getting stuck in with, you know, making a commercial rock band, and I think Phil wanted to stay down the sort of more bluesy route, and Phil knew where he was going. He had this vision, I think.
That pushed Lizzy into finding another guitarist. In matter of fact, they found two, and that was what gave them the blueprint for what was going to be a very, very successful second chapter.
Philip was definitely influenced by Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers, because after Eric left the band, he got the twin guitar lineup, and I think that was pretty much modelled on the Allman Brothers sound. We were huge fans, all of us, of the Allman Brothers, Duane Allman in particular, you know. And I think that's when, I mean, I know they were successful they had the minor success with Eric in the band, but I think that's when Philip really found this sound that was going to really do it for him, you know.
How can we live without your love?
they brought in an American called Scott Gorham and a young Scot called Brian Robertson, and that's when the twin guitar sound, which became so much a trademark of Lizzy, happened.
I think the twin guitar setup, obviously it wasn't new in rock music. I mean, the Allman Brothers had been doing it in America. Bands like Wishbone Ash had taken it on in Britain. But I think Thin Lizzy really established it as, if you like, a hard rock or heavy metal standard formation. And obviously Scott and Brian, very different characters.
I think Scott Gorham brought to Thin Lizzy, as well as some excellent guitar playing. He's a very sort of good-looking, pretty boy in a sort of American kind of way. So I think he brought a touch of a hint of glamour. And also he provided the, he was the sort of lighter, sweeter guitar sound, which was a perfect foil for Robertson's darker, sort of higher, energised guitar.
I think he brought that American, that slickness. You know, he liked things to be a bit slick, and I think that was cool. I mean, I think the balance between him and Brian was brilliant. Brian was very right in your face, right on it, and Scott was much cooler, and the balance was perfect. I mean, I think when Phil picked them, he picked two just great balances, and it really worked.
I guess he kind of thought I was his younger brother, and he sort of looked after me and shit, and I actually felt that made me feel good, because I didn't have anybody down here, you know. Do you know what I mean? I'd come all the way down from Glasgow to London, and he did look after me, and his mum looked after me, and cut.
At his very best, Brian Robertson was one of the great British lead guitarists. He had a sense of melody. He could make guitars talk. He could actually bring tears to the eyes the way he played. He had a real passion for the instrument. And when he looked into some of his solos, you could actually feel he and his guitar became as one. In the pantheon of great guitarists, Brian Robertson's definitely up there in the top echelon. But because of other problems, I don't feel he ever really developed his potential to its fullest extent.
On stage, the mixture of the two, it was the chalk and the cheese, and somehow they knew where to play and where to lay back, and obviously over the course of 3 or 4 albums and much touring, they refined that and perfected it, and as I say, it's now a standard.
They looked great, they gelled well, and they knew basically who was the boss, which was Phil. You know, bands aren't democratic, they're dictatorships. There's always one that tells everyone what to do.
He was very, very good at working, finding the right people, you know. And I think he did that obviously with Robbo and Scott and Brian Downey particularly. And then he could extract from those people what he needed to turn Thin Lizzy into what it was.
The very first album, which you know, I always say to people, I really like that album, right? And all the sort of like critics or whatever say that's a weird album, and I go, yeah, it is a weird album, but that's why I like it.
Nightlife, I don't figure to be really a classic album. The one great track on there, though, is a track called Still in Love with You, which obviously would become a great favourite. It's an interesting one because Frankie Miller, who was a great mate of Phil's, actually helped him not only sing the song in the studio, but write the song. And he never got credit for it, so I think poor old Frankie got left out a little bit there.
Is this the end? I'm still in love with you.
Overall, it's the album is a much more mature effort. There's some great guitar playing, actually. Gary Moore plays some really outstanding guitar on it. But mainly, I think the point about this album is that you can clearly hear Lynott's songwriting capabilities are really starting to develop, and he's starting to listen to all kinds of, you can hear sort of certain influences, American bands, American West Coast rock, you can hear in there, started to influence him. The whole thing has been kind of professionalised. You can hear that they've become more confident through their road excursions and their touring. Not slicker, but just tighter, more on it, and with the departure of Eric Bell, some of the lyricism had gone from the band, but replaced ably so by the rock power that Robertson and Gorham provided.
Like magic woman, you got a hold. Come on, baby, lose control. I want your body, not your soul. Come on, baby.
They also got Ron Nevison, who'd worked with The Who, as their new producer. And the combination of all these factors should have made Nightlife a great record. It didn't. The reason being there was too much laid-back material on the album. It's quite phenomenal when you think about the twin guitars pushing forward and driving, and a producer who was used to loud, hard music, that they came up with an album that was so quiet and calm. It was a hiatus. Lizzy didn't quite move forward in the way they wanted to on record, although it was obvious live they were.
So Nightlife was a strange album, simply because the band had turned from, the three-piece band with Eric, and then now it's the new band, and obviously record companies are going to want to, what are you doing? And we went from Barry White to, do you know what I mean? But having said that, I liked the Barry White shit we did, and I liked the kind of weird funk stuff we did. And I thought it had its place in where we were going to in the future.
While one, the gypsies warned of the danger. You can laugh and joke with your friends, but don't you ever talk to strangers. Although their offers may be sweet, I'll bet and I would wager. Away from me you're gonna stray, never come back to those who love me.
Fighting was an album where I think the guitars started coming into their own. I mean, I'd seen Lizzy for the first time, in fact, on the Nightlife tour, and they weren't really sparking. The ingredients were there, but the mix wasn't right. With Fighting, they began to get a little bit of what they were doing as the stage music improved. That carried over into Fighting, but the songs were not Phil's best.
That was a funny old album which they sort of meandered, because they're new members with Brian and Scott, it wasn't quite there, and they had to have another sort of time of change. But then when they hit Jailbreak, it was off and running, and they were off and flying.
With a reputation as one of England's top bands and an acknowledged big hit here, the boys are certainly back in town, and we've got them on Rock Concert.
In terms of content, there is no question that Jailbreak is the greatest album of Thin Lizzy's career. Every single song on that album is a standout. You've got Jailbreak itself with that wonderful line, tonight there's going to be a jailbreak somewhere in this town, and some wag once quipped, maybe it's the jail, Phil? But in all seriousness, it's a wonderful song. There's The Boys Are Back in Town, which is the ultimate Thin Lizzy anthem. It's a song that people just don't even realise is Thin Lizzy sometimes, because it's been used in so many different contexts and covered by so many different people, and it really is a statement of intent.
Hated it. I mean, if anybody asks me, The Boys Are Back Now, it's like, no, please don't. With Whiskey in the Jar, obviously their whole thing, especially in Ireland, went up to star level. Maybe not so much in the rest of the world, where it was, you know, it was a hit, but it wasn't a, you know, it didn't make them superstars, if you like. But The Boys Are Back in Town, obviously they became superstars throughout the world.
It's not just a standout track for Lizzy, it's a standout track for rock. It's become a statement of intent. Hey, guess who's back? We're back in town and we're going to rock you. And in a way it encapsulated being on the road, it encapsulated being in a gang, it encapsulated things about life, about being into rock and roll. And it had a great melody and a great fist-waving anthemic feel.
It was very much an anthem, and it's just the kind of thing that Phil would love to see people singing. I think he got a kick out of seeing people singing along, and that was the ultimate sing-along song.
Rock fans in general, even sort of for people that weren't Thin Lizzy fans in particular, they heard it on the radio and they were very happy to hear it on the radio because it was kind of decent, very classy rock music being played, as opposed to there's a particularly sort of syrupy, sweet kind of pop nonsense around at the time. Lots and lots of kind of really flowery, rubbish pop acts were dominating the charts. So it was a breath of fresh air hearing a proper rock band with a proper song.
What makes it really stand out, I think, still to me, is Lynott's understated vocals. He doesn't go over the top, he doesn't shout and scream, he does it in his talking style, his street talking style, which almost winks at you as much as stating what's going to happen.
The musical hallmarks, really, it's the twin lead guitar thing. You know, they held it back until the 3 or 4 verses have been sung, and 3 or 4 choruses. There's a sort of breakdown and a lull that just breaks down to just bass and just snare drum, and then bang, they come crashing back in, and it's Gorham and Robertson with their twin lead guitar thing, playing and it's just really, it's sort of high octane, really exciting, and you know, it's perfect head bashing.
There's Running Back, there's Emerald, there's Cowboy Song. Every single track on that album is a masterpiece.
It's a very good album. It's a fairly complete album, and already their sort of hard drinking, street fighting, hard rocking, testosterone driven image has started to sort of take effect as well. You can clearly hear the direction they're taking with the twin lead guitar thing, which had been done by Wishbone Ash already to great success. And the way that Gorham and Robertson were playing the twin lead guitars, it was almost like they were soloing, but soloing together, and usually one of the guitars would be in harmony.
We must remember also there are ballads, there's the sort of running back. The ballads, it's not necessarily all rock all the way.
Lynott had started to write and designing songs to compete with the sort of the highest rock bands in the land.
The only thing that lets it down somewhat is the production. The production doesn't quite gel with the songs. If only they'd had Tony Visconti, who was to come into their lives so soon afterwards, then this would have not just been the greatest album of Thin Lizzy's career, but up there in the top 5 of all time.
But the pacing of it is very clever, and I think it's an album that you can listen to and ride with and enjoy in one sitting.
It's kind of a landmark in their career, I'd say, and Commercially, it became their most successful album to date. It put them up there, not up there with the sort of Zeppelins and the Stones, etc. But, you know, they were a busy band touring. They developed a loyal fan base by that point, and they were starting to sort of see kind of pretty big album sales.
Down from the glen came the marching men with their shields and their swords to fight the fight they believed to be right. Overthrow the overlord.
One of the standout moments on the great album, Jailbreak being the album, was Emerald. And this showcased a certain side of Phil Lynott that sometimes gets overlooked. Apart from writing about the streets, his own life, and the people within it, he also had a fascination with Celtic history and the Irish people. He showed this with Massacre, he showed it with King's Vengeance, he showed it throughout his career, and Emerald is possibly the best song of that type he ever wrote.
It speaks of Irishness and Irish roots, of course, combined very cleverly with an epic rock band.
It captures the grandeur, the glory, the heroism of the Irish people, and he really did have this ability to move people through his words and his music by throwing himself into the whole culture of the Irish.
Philip was influenced by Celtic Christianity, Celtic monasticism, Celtic mysticism, Celtic spirituality, and that, you know, related to, I suppose, his upbringing, and he put a lot of that into his music, and it's there, you know. And I think you need more than just, you know, what's the word for it? Banal beliefs. You need something deeper to write good lyrics, you know.
I just think he was just a great lyricist and he was sort of poet in a way, but a rock poet, but he didn't come out as all arty. That was Phil. He came out as real rocky and had a bit of attitude.
I love Emerald. I think the lyrics are great. It sort of conjures up Phil's sort of romantic side. I think musically it has everything that was great about Thin Lizzy. It has the excitement, it has the depth, it has that sort of Celtic, Irish rock feel, and it's definitely one of my favourite songs.
It's technically a very difficult song to play, because you're playing stuff that is to do with rhythm from the drummer and rhythm from all the guitar players. And then you've got the harmony guitars coming up in the middle and all the rest of it. And if you're not together, you're not going to do it. Well, we did Around the World for years. And when we did it well, we did it real good.
Emerald could almost, I think, be a Gary Moore song, and obviously Gary came into the picture later on with a kind of Celtic rock. But Emerald was just a tremendous rocking number with Brian Downey clearly in control with the drums.
Brian Downey lasted all the way through. He was a constant with Lynott. And Brian Downey brought to the band two things. Firstly, he was very grounded. He was very sensible. He didn't have any of the rock star stylistics of so many others who were in and out of the band. Therefore, he gave the band a certain sense of rooting. Secondly, he was a very good drummer in the way that he enhanced the songs. Unlike other drummers who were flashy or flamboyant, Downey played the beat.
Fantastic drummer. One of the great rock drummers. Underrated, never given enough credit, solid as a rock, great sense of timing, great sense of taste. A drummer that plays a song doesn't play through. Lot of rock drummers just they play and they just heads down, last one to the end, buys the beers. You know, Brian actually plays a song. He builds up to a chorus, sits down. He's got a really good feel, solid as a rock. Very, very good drummer.
You didn't really notice the drums so much. They were like a very nice plain backdrop for the rich voice of Phil Lynott and for the song and the fire of the guitar playing.
He was the perfect drummer for Thin Lizzy. You could not imagine anybody else fitting into that lineup and doing something even remotely close to what Downey did.
I think Emerald probably highlighted everything that this Lizzy had to offer.
My favourite album is Johnny the Fox. Simply because I thought we'd grown up a little bit by then. And I had, maybe the rest of them, they were already grown up because they were older than me, right? But I actually felt that I'd grown up a little bit by Johnny the Fox, and I felt that the solos that I played, the lead guitar that I played, even the riffs that I put down were more seminal.
Don't believe me if I tell you, not a word of this is true. Don't believe me if I tell you, especially if I tell you that I'm in love with you. Don't believe me if I tell you.
One of the riffs that Robbo had was a riff in Don't Believe a Word, you know. That little dim, because originally Don't Believe a Word was a ballad. And then Phil liked that riff. So Phil took that riff and he added it to his ballad, and that became the fast version of Don't Believe a Word. But that was his great talent.
Following up Jailbreak, Johnny the Fox was a fascinating record because Phil Lynott used two characters on the record. Johnny the Fox, a drug-addled alcoholic on the streets, and Rocky, the rock star. And these were two sides of Lynott's character. And he had a song called Rocky, which is about the birth of a rock star. Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Weed with that funky element and that sort of swagger. There's also, of course, Don't Believe a Word, one of the greatest songs that Lizzy ever wrote. The problem Johnny the Fox had was it wasn't really a concept. There were conceptual elements in there, but Lynott never developed them to the point where there was a storyline threading throughout the whole thing.
But everybody thinks the concept album, seriously. I'll give you an idea of the concept. Philip said to me, I need a record cover. And I said, what's the title? He said, I have no idea. Do something. And he like, so I did this beautiful sort of Celtic metal border and left it blank in the middle because I figured last minute I could put bloody anything I like in there within a day or two. You know what I mean? Because before computers, you had to do everything by hand, you know. So there was, I think my deadline was the Monday, and there I was on Sunday with nothing in the middle, and I said to Philip, you know, give me something to put in this. The record company is screaming at me, you know, and they kick my ass, and I'm telling them I haven't got a title. And he said, call it Johnny the Fox. I said, what's that about? And he said, I don't know, but I'm writing a song at the moment. So I said, Johnny the Fox, okay, and that was it. So I had to sit down and think of something. So I remember the Nightlife, I had this sort of big Jaguar overlooking the city. And I had the city in the background, the fox in the foreground. I thought, that's as good as it gets. But there's no song in the album called Johnny the Fox. There's one called Johnny the Fox Meets Jimmy the Weed. And I said, that's not about me, is it? And he said, no, it's about some other guy, you know what I mean?
Don't believe a word, 'cause words can tell lies. And lies are no comfort when there's tears in your eyes.
Johnny the Fox was a little move into Americana, very much an American-centred album, a bit of a concept album in a way, but which ended up a little bit half-baked. I think you felt that there were some tracks like Boogie Woogie Dance, which finishes off the album, that was a bit of a carbon copy of Emerald, but it did have Don't Believe a Word, which was a tremendous single, and it had merit, but I think any album that tried to follow the success of Jailbreak was on a loser.
I never thought of it as a concept album. Maybe it is. I don't know. I just think it's a collection of great songs that have a very, very mild thread. I think Phil always thought of every album. He thought Vagabonds was a concept album. Every album he threaded, but it never came across like that, because rock and concept don't have a sort of love-hate relationship. He knew that. And sometimes concept works and everyone goes, oh yes, brilliant. And sometimes everyone goes, ooh. And I think that he never wanted to fall into that trap of being a concept band. He was much happier just making great rock records, cleverly winding the concept through it. And if someone wanted to sit down and get arty about it and be really sincere, go, yeah, sure.
Musically, I think Johnny the Fox was taking Lizzy a little further forward, whereas Jailbreak had a sense of being very much in a straight line and slightly veering off, but never really going off the straight and narrow. Johnny the Fox saw Lizzy trying different things. There was definitely a more of a soul and funky element to some of the songs, such as Don't Believe a Word, Johnny the Fox Meets Jimmy the Weed. It was rock, unquestionably rock, but Lynott's other influences were starting to come through.
Vocally, I think he was exploring new territories, and this wasn't necessarily a great direction for him to take. His voice was slightly more soulful, I think, and more musical, if you like, on a lot of the tunes on Johnny the Fox. But it lacked that kind of essential, quintessential sort of Lynott sort of edge and huskiness and sort of kind of slightly guttural voice. And there is a sort of theme throughout, which I guess is where the sort of concept album tag comes from. To me, it doesn't really work so much. It's sort of almost like a kind of rock version of sort of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So it's kind of heavy, romantic kind of imagery by Lynott.
Lynott was almost crying out for help, because he had a massive drug problem at the time, as we all know. And in a way, it was cathartic. It was his way of trying to get it out of himself without giving up what was really happening.
He loved the sort of the thrill of the whole thing that Thin Lizzy had managed to get themselves into. You know, he just lived the whole life as you would expect, really. He'd got himself into a fantastic situation where he was, you know, sort of adored by all these people, and he sort of, you know, he played on it because it was him. It was his life, you know.
When he first started to make it big, when he decided to take me touring around America, and we arrived at the Hyatt Regency, and I'll never forget the doorman bowing to us as we walked in, and then we're shown up to our rooms, and the next thing our door opened and a fellow walked in. And he walked over to the side of the bed and he put something there. And then he walked around to the other side of the bed and he left something there. And then he bowed and he walked out. He'd left an ounce of marijuana on either side of our bed. Philip's room was adjourning ours. I ran into Philip, I went, Philip, a man has just walked in and he's left this. Ah, Jesus, man, he's left it in the wrong room.
Nobody spots an alcoholic within the music business because there's so much drink freely available, and the way tours work and so on, when you arrive at a gig, there's drink there and there's food there, and there's drink before the gig and there's drink after the gig and there's a party after the gig, and so there's always a lot of alcohol around. Obviously, from stories that we've heard, Philip had become very dependent on alcohol, and eventually had become very dependent on hard drugs, which is sad.
When I passed you in the doorway, you took me with I should have took that last place home, but I asked you for a dance. Now we go steady to the pictures, and I always get chocolate stains on my hands. And my father, it's a grown-up crazy, says I'm living in a trance, and I'm dancing in the moonlight. It's happening in its spotlight. It's alright dancing in the moonlight on this long, hot summer night.
Bad Reputation is a glorious record. Bad Reputation saw Tony Visconti come into the lives of Thin Lizzy guys as a producer, and what Tony Visconti did was enhance what actually was happening musically. Maybe not as good an album as Jailbreak, perhaps not even as good as Johnny the Fox, but the sound is fantastic on the likes of Bad Reputation, Dancing in the Moonlight.
It's alright, dancing in the moonlight on this long, hot summer day.
Classic Phil Lynott sort of concept, fantastic. It's sort of more sort of biographical, just great image, and a lovely song, really nice piece of music.
That was had tremendous saxophone from John Irish Earl, which obviously meant that whenever they were playing it on stage, they had to have a sax man popping on to take the limelight for a couple of minutes.
So there's some nice lighter moments, so it was nice to hear Thin Lizzy in a sort of more maybe reflective mood, still with the menace and the darkness of the guitar work and the sort of Downey sort of dark, broody pounding drums. There's all those elements of the classic Lizzy are still there.
Basically going to the situation of being Bruce Springsteen. So that's where he was going, which is fair enough as a songwriter. That's fair enough and that's good. But it wasn't kind of where I was going. I was going somewhere else. So I didn't really take on board,
Brian Robertson joined the band at a young age, at 17, which is possibly why his lifestyle kind of got slightly pretty much out of control. It probably went to his head, the gigs, the after shows, the girls, and boy were the girls around Lizzy. So I think he possibly indulged in his two favourite things, whiskey and speed, and it was a bad combination. He would just get very antagonistic and aggressive when he was drunk and high on speed, and would pick fights.
He played hard, worked hard, and I think during part of the playing he got into a little bit of trouble in a pub defending his old Scots pal Frankie Miller. Sustained an injury which meant that he couldn't tour. That was obviously a problem. They had tour lined up. In the end, they got Midge to come in and Depp for them, and Midge, like anybody who's played with Thin Lizzy, enjoyed his experience. It was a little bit like playing for Manchester United, Phil's favourite football team. So he was flying off on Concorde with Live and Dangerous in his Walkman, learning the songs as he went.
Lynott realised that to sort of press on and then sort of take Lizzy up to the very sort of the highest echelons of the rock industry, it probably wasn't going to be with Brian Robertson around.
Bad Reputation, I think, was a bit of a transitional album. Nobody was quite sure whether Robbo was in or out of the band, so Scott did a lot of the double tracking guitars himself. It got the definitive lineup, it had done very well, and nobody was really sure who was coming, who was going. Gary Moore, Midge, Brian Robertson. It was a little bit of a holding operation, but one or two good tracks on there.
The trouble is they were struggling, I think, when they got to this peak, and like every band hits a real high peak, and then you never stay absolutely fully in top gear forever. No band does, nowhere, except unless you're the Beatles or the Stones, or some very, very, very the top 4 or 5. Otherwise you peak, then you sort of slide down, and then you groove along as being part of the establishment, you know, the AC/DCs of this world and the Iron Maidens. So I think they were struggling to find, trying to find another way of exciting themselves, because making albums, when you get onto your 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th album, it must be tough, you know, you're going in there with the same people, you must be, I think they were probably just struggling to excite themselves a bit, and I still love it. I mean, I just like the songs. Phil's songs are the things that work for me always.
There are so many good songs on this album, and Tony Visconti took it all and made it happen with almost a flash of genius. Tony Visconti, in his own way, was so used to dealing with great talents who were not necessarily difficult but mercurial, the likes of Bowie, and he brought all that experience to bear in bringing out the best from Lynott, something no other producer had ever done before and was never to do again.
Visconti was probably urging him or leading him into a very commercial direction, because Visconti definitely had that knack as a record producer. I think maybe Phil Lynott was attracted to the idea and liked the thought of being up there with the sort of the Jaggers and the, you know, such like those kind of people. But at the same time, the kind of raw energy, rock energy and raw power and passion of everything that Lynott had sort of put into Lizzy, I think he was aware that that could all sort of be dissolved and sort of fall away. So there's a slight kind of dichotomy. It's a slightly unsettled record as a result, I think.
Valentino in a polo sweat placed all his money on that last bet. Against all the odds, he smokes another cigarette. Says it helps him to forget he's in nervous wreck. It's not that he misses much, or even that he lost his lucky touch. It's just he gambled so much, you know that it's wrong. Waiting for another man, waiting just to catch your eye. Waiting for another man, waiting just to get your eye.
Gary Moore was a member of Thin Lizzy on so many different occasions, it's difficult to know when he was out of the band. He came in and toured with them, left, came in again to replace Brian Robertson, left, came back again. He was in, out, and his relationship with Phil Lynott went back to pre-Lizzy days when they were in a band in Ireland called Skid Row.
And there was a little bit of friction going on, in as much as Gary and Phil, both pals, obviously Parisian Walkways and what have you, but Gary had actually depped in the band before, back in the days when Eric Bell had left, but it was only going to be a short-lived liaison. I think the album as a whole, Black Rose, was something of a Celtic symphony, something of a concept album, worked better than Johnny the Fox.
Valentino, like Romeo, gotta know where to go. Blow by blow, he watches Lady go. Now he's a solo. It's not that he misses her.
I actually personally love what Gary Moore brought to Thin Lizzy. It was a kind of gut-wrenching blues sort of vibe, but in the idiom of a rock guitar player. I think his guitar playing was quite abrasive. So on Black Rose, it's kind of pushed Lynott's voice into places that with the previous lineup he wouldn't have ever gone.
Great guitar player. I mean, they've all been great guitar players, but he's another great guitar player. Brilliant technique, unbelievable technique. An attitude he had, which was good and not good. Sometimes there was a bit of, you know, Phil, but they were good together. I did 2 sessions with them, And we made the record Little Darling with him, and he was always really nice to me. I mean, I got a lot of respect for the guy, great guitarist.
And I think Gary Moore maybe took this sort of more sensitive side of Phil Lynott and kept it intact, but drove him to more kind of telling it like it is, more kind of bluesy, more blues-based, and I think it was had a good result.
Sarah, for instance, was a completely different side of the coin, because Phil was now a father and Sarah was a little song to his daughter, so that was quite sweet, perhaps not giving Brian the room that he'd had on S&M, but then we had the Celtic Symphony ending the track listing, and that was a chance for everyone to cut loose, and certainly Gary Moore was very much in there too.
While Gary Moore brought out things from Lynott no one else could, musicians-wise, Phil Lynott brought out things from Gary Moore nobody else could either. It was a wonderful complementation of talents.
Here's Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy on their Chinatown tour of Australia.
Okay, pal, we're here. That's $4, mate. Thanks very much. I thought we were going to have a talk.
Hey?
Thought we were going to have a talk.
We are having a talk, actually. I'm
Okay.
silly. Hope you enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, it was good.
Listen, congratulations on the...
From Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. On the Chinatown album.
Cheers.
It's, I've only just got it and I played it all last night. And
Yeah.
you must be very happy with it.
Yeah, I'm really pleased, and it's doing well in
Well, tell us about how it's going in England. It's already got a silver record, right?
Yeah, it's gone silver. It's not released yet.
Right.
But it's gone silver.
And the single?
Top 10, so...
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Now listen...
So we get to Chinatown, the 1980 album, and I think the band had come to a musical crossroads. It was, the 10th or 11th album by now. They'd had the big success that they'd looked for, but they weren't superstars or anything. And once again, Mr. Robertson had departed the band for one reason or another, and they brought in Snowy White, a great guitar player, classy guitar player.
The Gary Moore drama, and there's been a lot said, so we won't go into it all. That must have really thrown the band, though.
Yeah. Well, here we are a year later, back in the charts,
right.
Back in Australia.
Yeah, but I mean...
and the future looks really bright for us.
And how did you run into Snowy?
I seen him playing Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And I liked his playing then.
Right, well, the reason I asked about Snowy is the fact that it just seemed so incredible at the start, when he was jamming with Pink Floyd, for you and the rest of the band to get so excited and invite him into the band, because it just, I mean, Pink Floyd and Thin Lizzy don't exactly, should we sit a couple over here?
Yeah. And that
gel together, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the thing was, I mean, Pink Floyd, Snowy's been doing the gig with Pink Floyd for a couple of years. And it's like just a gig once every 2 years. As you know, Pink Floyd only play every 2 years. And he just wanted to be in something that was a little more raunchy.
Right.
And where he was his own man. And he was looking to join a band, whereas with Pink Floyd, he was just doing as he was told, sort of thing, you know.
The reason I joined Thin Lizzy when they asked me to was because I thought they were a good band. And I liked their songs. I thought they wrote some really classic songs, and they had their own sound, recognisable style, and I thought, well, when I spoke to the guys, we discussed the fact that there should be a bit of space for me to do my thing, a bit more bluesy, whatever. So I joined with a sort of high hopes.
Now, Snowy and Scott Gorham were a little bit too similar. I mean, they actually even looked similar, but there wasn't the same kind of clash of cultures and personalities that had been so productive before. And although Snowy's a great guitarist, and I think he's underrated, not the right man for the job.
Lynott suddenly had no one in the band to work with. He desperately needed somebody there who would challenge him. And he had Brian Robertson and Gary Moore before. He didn't have anyone now. And Snowy White's tenure in Lizzy was hugely disappointing and really saw the band slide downhill fast.
Now listen, Chinatown, like, you must have had a few reservations about how successful it's going to be, you know?
Yeah.
Considering, like, all that's going on in England, the charts, etc.
No, I knew this was a good one.
Yeah?
Yeah, because Snowy's so good.
Chinatown was a bit strange because I'd been working with Pink Floyd right up until the day before we started work on Chinatown. I'd been in Los Angeles, and then we did, I think we did a show, the Wall show in New York, and then the day after I flew back to London, and the day after that I was in the studio with Chinatown. So I knocked out a few riffs, which was the Chinatown riff was one of mine. And of course, because I was new and it was all fresh, it was good vibes. But even then, I started thinking, these guys are wasting a lot of time here. You know, they're wasting a lot of time, and I don't know whether they realise it's their money they're wasting, but when I get in the studio, I like to work.
I think he found Lizzy's way of working a little bit difficult. He'd turn up at the studio and nobody else would be there for the next 4 or 5 hours. By the time they'd arrived, he'd gone off the boil. So it was a bit of a clash of cultures, like Eric Bell had been back in 72, 73.
Phil always used brilliant guitarists. I mean, he was blessed like that. Always used great guitarists. Yeah, I think he was a good addition to the band, but again, I think at that stage, I think that maybe Phil was losing interest, or maybe he was struggling with himself or with being a rock star for so long, or I don't know. But I think they made some good records with Snowy, but I don't know whether they will be considered great records just purely because of the time and space they were in, you know. But again, all the stuff he did were great albums, great records, and great songs that he always played on. So, and a very, very, very clever technician on the guitar. You know, always will be.
Chinatown was a disappointing album. It didn't have the strength of songwriting. It didn't have the depth that had gone before. Killer on the Loose was an excellent song, and the title track itself was quite decent. The rest of the album was skating. It didn't seem to really pull together. Part of the problem, I think, is that Lynott's indulgences were overtaking everything else.
The writing, even though you come up with Kill on the Loose, which is a great track, and the band contributed heavily to that track, the rest of the songwriting is wispy, it's bitty, it's slightly disjointed. On some tracks on this album, you can hear that they were regurgitating riffs and bits of melodies that they knew would work.
People sort of dismissed Chinatown for some reason. That was a pretty hot rocking album, you know what I mean? It was a lot of unfortunate things happened with Chinatown. I always remember when Killer on the Loose was heading straight to #1, the record company ran out of product. They couldn't get it in the shops. It went down to #10, and from then on went to freefall. Well, it was heading all the way up. And Killer on the Loose then got a lot of negative publicity because it was suggested it was written for Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. But the papers picked on it, the tabloids loved it, and that was it. There's a lot of good songs on that.
Now, Chinatown, it's back to, in some respects, back to Thin Lizzy of old, you know, I feel. You know, like, it's really raunchy, it's hitting you right between the eyes.
Yeah, a little lower.
Yeah.
But I think it is, definitely. It's got a lot of guts up. And I think what's really neat about Chinatown, you know, a lot of people thought, like, I might be going soft with the solo album and the kids and stuff. Chinatown dismisses that, like, straight away, because you can see the aggression.
People had overdosed on guitar solos by 1980, and well, it was the beginning of the 80s, so there was I think that the sort of long-haired guitar rocker sort of idiom was starting to reach maybe the end of its sort of shelf life. There were so many bands with that exact formula that people were tiring of it. They even made a classic band, a classy band like Thin Lizzy, look a bit sort of tired.
It didn't hang, it just never really kicked. And unfortunately, it became a dud, and it heralded an era that was disappointing for Lizzy.
My first album was Chinatown, and even then we've got like little synth sounds creeping in on stuff like you know, Killer on the Loose and Chinatown in particular, and then more so with Renegade. You know, then he was very kind enough to give me like a feature on a track that him and Snowy had written, the track called Fats. But it was very nice of him to give me the opportunity to be involved in the writing, really, because we didn't have to do that.
There were a lot of tracks that I really enjoyed and that did work. I thought Renegade worked. The track Renegade, that worked well. I mean, I'm only talking about the ones I was involved with, but there were one or two. I can't think of their titles. There were one or two that I figured could have been a lot better if we just spent more time. But then Phil didn't turn up. You know, if he's not in the studio, what can you do? So much money and time wasted.
He's just a boy that has lost his way. He's a rebel that has fallen down. He's a fool that's blown away. To you and me, he's a renegade.
If you look at the sleeve with guys holding up flags and this kind of thing, a little bit more style and substance.
I always thought Renegade was a good record. I thought it was better than everyone else thought it was. Everyone else thought it was marking time. Maybe it was, you know. I mean, bands have to, you know. Bands have to make albums, you know. When bands sign contracts, they have to deliver so many albums. Manager goes, okay, right, it's time for another album. Better go in. Phil goes off, writes about 20 songs, you know. Band go in, make another album. Sometimes he's inspired, sometimes he's not. I mean, that's life, isn't it? We've all been there.
Phil again going for the American line of things, the Mexican and Hollywood titles that again hark back to his feeling for Americana, but there wasn't a great deal of Celtic influence in there now. To some extent, Lizzy were now a hard rock band that happened to have a charismatic singer, whereas before they were regarded as something very much one of a kind.
The album has a disjointed feel. I don't think Snowy White's heart was completely in it, so there wasn't that kind of homogeneous sort of instant feel-good factor from the guitars that we've come to expect from Thin Lizzy. On this album, I don't think he sparked with Scott Gorham in the same way that Brian Robertson did.
Snowy was a great player, a wonderful player, but Snowy brought another sort of side to Thin Lizzy, I think, that was a bit more putting the emphasis on the blues side of things. And looking back, I'm not sure if that was what the fans wanted. It wasn't particularly an issue between anybody in the band, it was just Snowy's style, and obviously Snowy had been with Pink Floyd, and Snowy's a fantastic musician in his own right. But at that point, I think Thin Lizzy probably were looking for something a bit more extrovert and a little bit more you know, a bit more fiery.
I don't think I was really the right guy for the band because I wasn't a rocker. When I started playing the guitar, it was just because I wanted to play the guitar, and my only ambition was to earn a living playing the guitar. And I didn't really think about becoming sort of, you know, a rocker or a rock star or any sort of star, really. and that band was sort of in that direction, so it wasn't really comfortable for me.
By the time Renegade came out, Lizzy were no longer really singles chart contenders. They had obviously declined in general popularity, and something else was needed to come in and give them a good kick. And it was a period really where they needed another ingredient now to rekindle the fire.
They'd run out of ideas, basically. There's only so many ideas you can have on electric guitar. So I think that Lynott had been used to writing where he knew that he could always rely on that the guitars would take the song to a really exciting place, take it up a gear after he'd sort of really sung one verse, chorus, second verse, and then second chorus. And on this album you can hear that that's what he's done, relying on the guitars to sort of take it to the next level, and in fact it kind of falls flat in his face.
What he needed as a leader was people to lead and people to challenge him. He worked best in that clashing situation. Lynott suddenly didn't have anyone to clash with, and I think it showed on Renegade, which was a real disappointment.
I think Thunder and Lightning was a renaissance. The album, the track, they were trying to find where they were going for a new decade, and I think they put down a reasonable marker here.
Feel lucky on the inside.
Thunder and Lightning album sees John Sykes come into the band, playing guitar and adding vocals, and having quite a big influence, I think, for the good.
What Sykes was a modern heavy metal guitarist. He was flashy, he was flamboyant, he belonged to the 1980s era when perhaps a certain feel went out and was replaced by exhibitionism.
John was obviously the last guitarist before the band disbanded, and I think John was just a bit of came in with a bit of a kick. Added a bit of a very different dimension, obviously, from Snowy, and it just sort of added this whole sort of slightly edging towards heavy metal, really.
John Sykes, I think, was probably more suited to the heavy metal that he went into, but for the time he was there, he gave Lizzy a good kick up the backside when they needed it.
John Sykes brought something that I really like into the band, and with the texture of the keyboards as a backdrop for that, I think it's a really nice sort of interface, a new interface, and a new vibe and a new sound, which sparked Lynott to sort of write some good songs. So I think that the songwriting was a real return to form, you know, from the sort of previous sort of kind of rut that I think he's fallen into.
Lynott once again had someone to play off. He had that character there. He had someone who was going to rub him up the wrong way to some extent, challenge him. And the songs which came out on Thunder and Lightning, Cold Sweat, Thunder and Lightning itself, were fantastic. This was a real return to form.
The title track, Thunder and Lightning, that's sort of got some great musical hallmarks. It powers away in a sort of fairly classic, established Thin Lizzy style. So that's kind of them back up to steam. And I think what is most notable is that it's a return to form of Phil Lynott's vocals. I think he'd sort of lost his way in the previous album.
There is a demon in us, and his soul belongs in hell. Send tears to redeem us, and he knows it all too well. He comes and goes, he comes and goes.
It's very much the kind of imagery that Phil liked to play with. You can imagine being at a festival playing and the sun goes down. The sun obviously went down on Phil far too soon, but certainly at this point nobody really knew what was to come.
I just think that after a while Phil became less of a musician and wanted to become more of a celebrity. And then he got into a bit of drink and drugs, and so you get the frustrations and you get the problems, and the management were very frustrated because it's difficult to work with somebody who's a bit unreliable and doesn't turn up when they say they're going to turn up.
When he finally did go on to hard drugs, when he finally went seriously on heroin, he denied it to everyone of his friends, including myself, who questioned him kind of rigorously about it, because I found burned tinfoil in his house one day when I was over in London with him. Obviously the marks where he was burning heroin, chasing the dragon and stuff like that. That was bad enough, you know. But he swore to me he wasn't using heroin, and you always believe Phil, he wasn't a liar, you know, but obviously heroin addicts turn into liars as well.
I would say to Philip, don't ever, ever take heavy drugs. And it's Matt, for God's sake, we've all tried everything.
The problem is when the figurehead is so important, and the figurehead goes in a funny direction or is difficult to work with, then the whole thing falls apart.
I have to say that later on in life, I did notice changes, but then the drugs and the drink changes us all, doesn't it? I mean, what can you do? I mean, I know now that he did become very arrogant and shouting at people. Maybe they deserved to be shouted at, but you know.
Affected everything. Affected his music, affected his life, affected his relationships with his wife, with his children, with his friends, and it affected everything. It destroyed him.
I really thought he'd be okay. Philip would be okay, you know. He's a big-hearted, strong guy, you know. And unfortunately, he wasn't okay.
I watched Philip die a very hard death. His marriage had gone. Both his wife and him had been on the drugs, and the marriage had gone by the wayside. And the last words my son said to me, and I've told everybody, and I'll never forget them as long as I live. He said, "Merciful Jesus, what have I done to you?" And that was the last thing Philip ever said to me. And when I see the sadness in his eyes, that he knew he'd wasted his life.
Very, very sad indeed. I mean, he was a good mate, very good to me in my formative years as a producer, very understanding, very supportive, good fun, great fun, fantastic fun, and a genuinely decent bloke. You know, he had his moments, don't we all? I had my moments, trust me. But he was genuinely a really, real great loss to the rock business. A great loss.
She tries her best to but she is captured by her spell. She knows now she must deceive him. He knows this all too well.
It's only since the death of Phil Lynott people have realised what a great talent he was, because he wrote songs, he sung songs. Lizzy were a hard rock band who drew influences from the Celtic area, from the blues, from soul, from funk, even to some extent from jazz. They were never afraid to experiment. And it's only now, I think, people actually are waking up to how great Lizzy were.
At the end of the day, what they failed to do was they failed to have on each album 2 or 3 songs that became classics. and that's usually the formula, the winning formula for bands that sort of achieve superstar status. As a writer, gifted as Phil Lynott was, I don't think he ever really sat down and thought, I'm going to write an album that's going to have like 2 or 3 rock classics and anthemic classics of it, will be around forevermore.
Underrated in the rest of the world, yes, but not in this country. I mean, Darkness, love them. You know, you speak in America, people speak quite highly of them as well. I mean, no, not underrated. Deserve more credit. Every great band does, but I don't think underrated. No, I think everyone holds them in great esteem. They were a great rock and roll band, and they deserve their place in the Hall of Fame along with all the others.
Phil Lynott's one of the greatest songwriters of all time. In fact, let's take the music away. The songs stand up as poetry. The lyrics stand up as poetry in their own right. And I know Phil Lynott was so proud of a lot of his songs that he actually published them in book form as poems, and they worked. And in a way, I know this is going to sound very pretentious, but he was the Byron of his generation.
We were into longevity, I am, and he was, and we always sort of saw ourselves walking the beach, you know, 2 old guys sort of reminiscing about the good old days, blind lemon liners or whatever, you know. But it wasn't to be.
She comes and goes, she comes and goes, and she knows it all so well. But when all is said and done, the sun goes down.
You know, I remember that day, the day of his funeral out in Sutton, and it was very, very sad day, very, very sad. It was a sad day for Dublin because Philip was such a huge figure in Dublin, and he was very, very much loved in this city because he was a huge Irish character.
The reason that they made it, as opposed to a group like, say, Budgie, was basically Phil. Same kind of group, same kind of heavy music, but you had a guy there who was sex on a stick and could charm the birds from the trees, and did. Unfortunately, what that meant was that you couldn't replace him if he was unable to fulfill his obligations, and so obviously there'd be no Thin Lizzy without Phil.
There is a demon within us, and his soul belongs to hell. Won't someone redeem?
All these definitive attitudes towards Thin Lizzy, like this album is the only Thin Lizzy album. It ain't like that. Thin Lizzy, you know, it's an evolution from, I suppose, a fairly ballady kind of oriented, poetic, mystical, Celtic influence pop group, rock group, into hard rock and roll, into really driving hard rock and roll, and then slowly Philip himself was getting mellower. I mean, if you think of the songs like Kathleen and Sarah, very beautiful songs to his daughters. He was evolving into something really interesting. I'd love to know where it would have gone.